Callan, I was hauling a load of replacement beams up to this old forestry cabin out past Kenner Ridge when things started going sideways. About halfway up the access road, the truck hit something so hard the whole cab jolted. My toolbox clattered off the seat and landed in the footwell with a loud metallic thump that made me flinch. For a second, I honestly thought the axle had snapped clean off. I braked hard and climbed out, already bracing for a flat or a blown shock, but all 4 tires were firm, no hissing air, no fluid leaking onto the gravel. The undercarriage looked exactly like it had that morning when I checked it in the yard. I did a slow lap around the truck anyway. My hand dragged across the fender, trying to find some sign, anything, that explained why the whole frame had felt like it jumped sideways. The metal was cold and gritty under my palm. Nothing out of place. When I finally climbed back in, I noticed the odometer had reset. Just a row of zeros like the truck was brand new. I blinked at it, hoping I was seeing it wrong. But no, still 0. My first thought was maybe the battery cable had shaken loose, but the engine hadn't even flickered. The headlights were still on. The radio hummed quietly, static fading in and out. I shut the ignition off, counted to 10, then turned it back on. Same thing, 0 miles. And the clock on the dash, 9.42. I'd left New Cardiff at 11.48 on the dot. I remembered because I'd glanced at my watch in the lot before pulling out. I didn't love the idea of being stuck up there if the battery died for real, so I decided to leave the truck where it was and walk the last couple miles. The sun was still high enough. I figured I'd have plenty of time to hike in, check everything, and get back down before dark. I locked the doors, hoisted my pack onto my shoulder, and started along the trail. It was the same old forestry track I'd walked probably 50 times. Switchbacks cutting up the ridge, faded timber markers nailed to the trees, shallow cuts in the rock where water had worn little grooves over the years. I don't know exactly when I noticed it, but past the mile marker, this cracked old board nailed to a bent poplar. The trail slanted in a way I'd never seen before. I stopped in the middle of the path. You could feel it under your boots. A slow, steady lean to the left, like the ground was quietly sliding away. I turned around to check. Even looking back the way I'd come, the angle was obvious. The trail dipped and sloped, like it had shifted a few feet downhill when nobody was paying attention. I tried to cut across the slope, thinking maybe I'd find where it straightened out. But the more I walked sideways through the trees, the more it felt like the trail itself was nudging me along this new direction. Every time I looked up, it was still there, winding off to the left like it had always been that way. I stopped and checked my watch again. 9:42. I tapped the glass, partly out of habit, partly out of frustration. Nothing. The whole place was quiet in a way I couldn't explain. No wind in the leaves. No birdsong. Just the faint creak of my pack when I shifted my shoulders. I walked on, hoping the incline would even out. After maybe 100 yards, it did. The trees thinned, and I could see the cabin ahead, sitting right where it was supposed to be. The old tin roof glared in the light, edges bright and sharp. For a second, I felt a rush of relief, like maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Then I noticed the door hanging halfway open. I knew for a fact I'd locked it 3 days before. I'd latched the padlock myself, double-checked it before heading back to town. I stood at the edge of the porch with my hand braced on the frame, trying to listen. The air felt heavy. Still nothing moved. Inside, the beams I delivered last week were stacked in their usual spot against the far wall, except for one. It was laid out in the middle of the floor, cut neatly in half, both ends lined up perfectly straight. I stepped inside, boots scuffing against the old boards, crouched to look closer. The wood looked freshly milled, pale and smooth. No sawdust, no splinters. No marks where a blade should have gone through. I ran my fingertips along the edge. It was warm, like it had been cut moments before I walked in. Next to it, there was a folded piece of yellow paper. My name, printed across the front in perfect block letters. Callie. I picked it up and opened it, feeling the paper crackle in my hands. You are moving in circles. You should not be here. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it might shake the note right out of my grip. I didn't remember pocketing it, just that I backed out onto the porch, scanning the clearing like something was about to step out from behind the trees. That's when I saw the footprints. They trailed off the porch steps in a straight line. No hesitation, no turns. Same tread as my boots, same size, same distance between each step, like someone had measured it out. I knew I should have left, climbed back down that trail, and never looked back. But instead, I followed them. Maybe that sounds stupid, but in the moment it felt like I had to know where they led. 20 yards in, the print stopped. In the middle of a patch of packed soil, something was laid out flat. A single work glove. My work glove. The right hand one I'd lost behind the shed a week before. I bent to pick it up, half expecting it to vanish. The fabric was dusty, familiar. But when I closed my hand around it, the fingertips were warm. Almost soft, like it had just come off someone's hand. I turned back toward the cabin. There was a man standing at the edge of the porch, canvas coat, dark jeans, same build, same height. When I took a few steps closer, I realized he had my face, even the small white scar on my left forearm from when I'd snagged the barbed wire fence that winter. He didn't move, didn't even blink, just stared like he'd been waiting for me to notice him. I raised my hand mostly to see what he'd do. He lifted his, same motion, slow and deliberate, like I was looking into a warped mirror. I tried to speak, my voice cracked. Too thin. Who are you? His mouth opened in the same second, no sound came out. I took a step back. He mirrored it perfectly, even the way his boot heel pressed into the dirt. I moved left, he shifted with me right. Same thing. Every time I moved, he copied it exactly. I kept backing away, slow and careful, trying not to trip over the roots. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get a full breath. When I reached the place where the trail had first started to slope, I looked down. My watch ticked forward 1 second. Then another. /942 turned to 943. I looked up again. He was gone. I didn't wait to see if he'd come back. I walked the last mile at a steady jog, never glancing behind me. When I broke through the tree line and saw my truck still idling, headlights glowing in the dim clearing, I felt this rush of shaky relief that nearly dropped me to my knees. I climbed in, slammed the door, and locked it out of sheer reflex. I didn't touch the odometer, didn't look at the dash clock. I just put it in reverse and backed down the road without checking my mirrors once. When I reached the highway, I pulled onto the gravel shoulder and shut the engine off. Sat there gripping the wheel until my breathing sounded normal again. On the drive home, I called the forestry office, told them I wouldn't be coming back up to the cabin. When they asked why, I just said there were issues with the trail that made access unreliable. That was all I was willing to share. I was driving up into the Blue Ledge foothills to meet an old co-worker, Joel, who kept insisting he knew a hidden trout stream that nobody else ever bothered to fish. He'd been talking it up for months, said the water was so clear you could count every scale on the fish before you even cast. I guess I wanted to believe it. I left before sunrise, still half asleep, the car smelling like coffee and that cheap vinyl cleaner I'd sprayed the day before. In the back seat, I tossed a cooler packed with turkey sandwiches I didn't really want, a spool of extra line, and a crumpled paper map Joel had drawn in thick blue marker. He'd labeled it with these big looping letters like he was doodling in a high school notebook. The farther I drove, the narrower the road got. First the asphalt cracked and turned to patches. Then it disappeared into loose gravel with weeds sprouting up the middle. After a while it was nothing but 2 muddy ruts through brush high enough to tap against the undercarriage. Every so often I'd hear something clatter under the car, and I'd wonder if I'd just lost a piece of the exhaust. The plan sounded easy enough. Fish the creek for a few hours, maybe cook up a couple fillets over a camp stove, head home before dark. That was it, nothing complicated. But when I finally rolled into the clearing he'd circled in marker, there was no sign of Joel. No truck. No footprints. No gear left leaning against a tree. Just an old picnic table buried halfway in sumac and a wooden trail sign, so weathered I had to run my fingers across it to feel where the letters used to be. I cut the engine and sat there with my hands still wrapped around the wheel. The trees pressed in close on all sides, almost like they were waiting. I kept telling myself he'd probably just parked somewhere else, maybe hiked in to scout ahead. I waited almost an hour, ate one of the sandwiches just to have something to do. The bread was soggy and stuck to the roof of my mouth. The whole time I kept expecting to hear an engine or footsteps, or even a voice calling my name. But it was just silent, not even birds. That silence felt worse than any noise could have, like the whole place was holding its breath. Eventually I decided I couldn't sit there anymore. I scribbled a note, just my name, the time, and that I'd walked in to look for him, and weighed it down with a rock on the table. I didn't take my pack. I don't even know why. I just grabbed my water bottle and shoved my keys deep into my pocket. Like if I kept them close, I could leave any time I wanted. The trail started off looking almost normal. A wide dirt road probably carved out by loggers years ago with deep ruts and a tangle of branches overhead. I tried to keep my breathing steady. I told myself again and again that he was just up ahead, maybe cursing me for being late. About 15 minutes in, I spotted the first shirt. It was draped over a low branch to my right. A faded little flannel, probably a child's, the sleeves limp like someone had just hung it there. I thought maybe it had blown in from somewhere, but there was no wind at all. The air felt heavy, like the inside of an old shed. I kept walking, but a tight heat started crawling across the back of my neck. Not even a minute later, I came across another shirt, a man's work shirt this time. Pale blue, laid out flat on a stump with every button fastened all the way up to the collar. It looked deliberate, too neat. I crouched to look around the stump. Nothing. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. Oh, my mouth felt dry. I told myself I'd go a few more yards, just to see if Joel had left any clue where he'd gone. Then down the slope, something bright caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a scrap of fabric caught on a branch. But when I looked closer, I saw it was a whole line of shirts nailed to tree trunks along a dry creek bed. Blue, red, plaid, white. Dozens of them, each nailed at the shoulders. Some looked like they'd been there for years. Bleached almost see-through. Others were stiff and clean. I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the spot. My heartbeat thumped against my ribs. Too fast and too hard. It took everything I had to make my legs start moving again. I walked, not ran. Some part of me was sure running would trigger something worse. I was nearly to the bend where the trail looped back when I heard it. A voice close behind me. It lost something. My heart stuttered, so hard I felt dizzy. The words were soft and low, like someone whispering straight into my ear, but when I turned, the man was 20 yards back, standing dead center in the path. He had a red ball cap pulled down so low I couldn't see his face, just the shape of his jaw and the shadow under the brim. He wore a dark jacket, hands shoved deep into the pockets. I swallowed, but my throat felt swollen like I'd been yelling. "I'm just heading back," I said, and the words came out thin and scraped raw. He didn't answer. He didn't even shift his weight. Just lifted one arm and pointed down the slope at the shirts. "Not that way," he said. His voice was flat. No anger, no curiosity, just empty. I stood there, too aware of my heartbeat, the way the pulse thumped behind my eyes. "Not that way," he said again, louder this time. That was it. My body took over before my brain could decide. I turned and started up the trail as fast as I could walk without breaking into a run. My boots slipped on loose gravel, and every scuff echoed too big in the quiet. I kept expecting to hear him behind me, those footsteps matching my pace, but there was nothing. When the clearing came into view, my stomach flipped. The picnic table was empty. My note was gone. I didn't stop to think about it. I dug the keys out with shaking hands, nearly dropped them twice, and unlocked the car. I climbed in, slammed the door, and gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles went pale. I turned the ignition. The engine caught on the first try, and I almost laughed. It sounded too normal, too bright. I threw the car into reverse and stomped the gas. The tires spun and skidded sideways, throwing gravel into the trees. I didn't care. I just wanted distance. I didn't slow down for potholes or low branches clawing the sides of the car. I didn't stop until the gravel turned back into cracked asphalt, and the trees fell away enough I could see sky. I pulled over by a barbed wire fence sagging between two cedar posts. My hands were still locked around the wheel. My breathing came in ragged little pulls that never felt big enough. I picked up my phone. Still no signal. I tried to swallow the taste in my bitter metallic. I made myself look in the rearview mirror. The road was empty, no figure in a red cap, no one at all. I sat there, telling myself it had to be a local trying to spook outsiders, just a mean trick to keep people away. But no part of me believed it. I turned the wheel and drove east, gripping the wheel so hard my fingers ached. When I finally spotted a gas station with a payphone bolted to a cinder block wall, I nearly took out the curb trying to stop. My name's Marlowe. I was heading up the old utility road near Grayson Creek to check a stretch of boundary markers that had been cut for the third time in about a month. Land disputes around here are basically a family tradition nobody's proud of. My dad used to say the property lines in these hills were just polite suggestions everyone pretended to respect until they didn't. It was always a matter of time before somebody started hacking down fences, or shifting markers a few feet deeper into their neighbor's claim. That morning, I figured it'd be the same routine as usual. Hike in, snap a few photos of the damage, make a note in my log, and be back at the truck by lunch. Maybe swing by the diner in Sycamore Falls for coffee before heading home. I just passed the last numbered post when something flickered up the slope, just at the edge of my vision, a quick red blur sliding between two hickories. It wasn't like an animal darting through the brush. It moved smooth, like a person trying not to be noticed. I stopped, pressing my clipboard tight against my chest. My mouth felt dry in a way that seemed out of proportion, but there it was. "Hey," I called up, trying to make my voice carry without sounding like I was rattled. "This is private land. You need to come down here and talk to me." Nothing, no rustle, no reply. I stood still, listening. The woods got that hollow quiet where it feels like everything's holding its breath with you. You start to hear your own heartbeat and the small sounds your clothes make when you shift your weight. After a few seconds, I started climbing, boots sliding on old leaves. The slope wasn't steep, but I felt like I was moving too slow anyway. My palms were starting to sweat, and I kept telling myself it was just some local who didn't want to get caught trespassing. When I got up to the big oak, I'd seen the figure duck behind. It was nobody, not even a footprint, no bent grass, no snapped twigs, just empty ground, and that sense that I was being watched from somewhere else entirely. I turned a slow circle, trying not to look like someone about to bolt. The back of my neck was tight enough to ache. I pulled the radio off my belt and thumbed the button, hoping I could at least get Eli on the line. All I got was thick static and the faint buzz of a carrier tone. I walked the clearing twice, checking behind every stump and rock. Same result. The place was so empty it felt staged, like whatever I'd seen had never been there at all. When I finally made it back to the base of the slope, the radio came alive again. "Eli, you copy?" "Yeah, go ahead. I had someone up here a minute ago. Male, I think. Red flannel, blue jeans." Wouldn't answer. He was quiet a long moment. Long enough that I wondered if the radio had died again. That'd be Nolan. I waited, hoping he'd go on. "You probably haven't heard. He disappeared up there in '95. They searched the ridge for a week. Nothing." I kept expecting him to laugh, or at least say he was just trying to mess with the new guy. But he didn't. After that, I spent the rest of the day glancing over my shoulder every few steps, convinced I'd see a flash of red drifting along the ridge line. A couple weeks later, I was leading a group of hikers along the South Ridge overlook. 12 people, some families, a retired couple from Tennessee, a young pair who kept lagging behind to photograph moss on tree trunks like it was a national treasure. We stopped at the clearing above the bend in the river, so folks could catch their breath. One woman raised her hand and asked, "Is it safe to walk down to the water from here?" I followed where she was pointing. There was a woman standing ankle deep at the water's edge, facing upstream. She was wearing a long white nightgown, the hem floating around her ankles like old gauze. From that distance, I couldn't see her face clearly, but something about the tilt of her head made my scalp prickle, like she was eavesdropping on us without moving a muscle. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. "You can hike down if you stay on the trail, but you shouldn't wade in. The current can change fast." I lifted my hand to wave her up. "Ma'am, you need to come back to the bank. It's not safe." She turned toward me. Where her eyes should have been were just two deep hollows. No movement, no blink, just empty pits, sunk so far into her skull, I couldn't see the bottom. One of the kids made this soft, strangled noise and pressed his face into his mom's jacket. I glanced over my shoulder, and half the group was gripping each other's arms. The couple with the camera looked frozen, like they weren't sure if they should take a picture or start running. When I turned back, she was gone. The water where she'd been standing was glassy, like nothing had broken the surface. Nobody asked any more questions after that. Most people, when they find out what I do, want to know if I've ever seen Bigfoot or those so-called skunk apes. They'll lean in like they expect me to tell them some secret that'll make their day. I usually tell them no, and I'm not exactly lying. Whatever I've seen doesn't belong in any of the stories people swap over campfires. About a month later, I was driving the ATV up a maintenance trail across the ridge above Wren Hollow. Late afternoon, the kind of dim light where you can't always trust what you see out of the corner of your eye. I was easing around a curve when something black, and low to the ground, lunged across the trail. I hit the brake so hard the tires locked and skidded sideways into the brush. The engine coughed once and died, leaving me sitting there with my heart doing this unhelpful flutter in my throat. For a moment, I couldn't make myself move. I just kept one hand braced on the dash, listening to the tick of the cooling engine. When I finally climbed out, the air smelled like warm antifreeze. I walked around the front bumper and saw it curled in the dirt a few feet ahead. It looked almost canine, about the size of a big shepherd, but the spine was too long, the back legs bent in a way that made my stomach clench. The fur was glossy black, so slick it looked wet. I crouched carefully, keeping distance. The face was the worst part, flat and narrow, no ears, no snout, just a taper ending in two thin slits that pulsed open and shut. I realized it was breathing, and my mouth went dry. I lifted the radio and pressed the transmit button with a hand that felt like it belonged to someone else. "Eli," I said, trying not to let my voice shake, "you'd better come up the ridge. Bring a tarp." He pulled up about 20 minutes later, headlights bouncing across the trees. When he got out and saw it, he didn't say a word. He just looked at me, then back at the thing, like he'd run out of words altogether. We ended up sliding it onto a canvas tarp. Parts of it were hard as old bone. Others gave under my hands like bruised fruit. The wildlife office sent a pair of trucks the next morning. They loaded it into a metal crate. That was the last time I let curiosity get the better of me up there. I was hiking up this old mining trail in the Blue Ridge when things started to unravel in a way I still don't fully understand. I'd been out there alone for 3 days already. The local historical society had asked me to map out the entrances to abandoned shafts, maybe take some photos so they could apply for preservation grants. They handed me a stack of brittle tan maps, the kind that flake apart if you fold them too many times, and a cheap GPS unit that lost its mind whenever I stepped into a hollow or got too close to the cliffs. Honestly, I didn't mind the inconvenience. A part of me liked the idea that I was the only person around for miles in any direction. No cell towers, no traffic, no human sounds except the crows drifting from one dead pine to the next, squawking like they were arguing over who got to sit on the highest branch. That morning, I got moving before the sun was really up. I'd marked a spot called Cedar Run number 3 on the survey notes. The record said it was one of the deeper shafts, partially collapsed, sometime in the 1930s. The trail leading there was just a faint thread of crushed grass and broken twigs that snaked across the ridge line, like something the land itself had tried to heal over. I walked slow, one eye on the ground the whole time, because all it would take was one hidden air shaft and I'd vanish under the leaves. After about an hour, the path bent hard to the left and dropped steep into a gully thick with rhododendrons. It looked ordinary enough, but as soon as I stepped onto that switchback, the air felt heavier, almost damp, like it was pressing against my skin. I didn't like it, but I kept moving. That's when I noticed something that made me stop cold. A white envelope lay on a mossy boulder right beside the trail. At first I thought maybe a hiker ahead of me had dropped it, but when I picked it up, something in my chest locked tight. My first name, Lyle, was written across the front in these big, looping letters that looked too careful to be casual. It reminded me of the way my grandfather used to label jars in his shed. Deliberate, almost formal, I didn't open it. My fingers went numb in this fuzzy, unreal way, like I'd slept on my hands too long. I tucked the envelope into the front pocket of my pack, thinking maybe if I just ignored it, it would stop mattering. For the next half mile, I kept running through every rational explanation I could scrape together. Maybe one of the survey guys had decided to mess with me. Maybe there was another Lyle round, and I'd found their mail by coincidence. But deep down, none of it felt convincing. What really stuck in my mind was the handwriting. It had this old-fashioned tilt, the kind you see in century-old ledgers in courthouse basements. That detail is what kept me from pretending it was just litter. There was more and more. When I reached the coordinates, Cedar Run number 3 didn't look like much, just a wide gash in the hillside. Years ago, somebody had braced the entrance with huge timber beams, but they'd all rotted and collapsed. So only a crooked black triangle remained. Cold air leaked out and darkened the leaves under the gap. I crouched down to get a better look. The inside was pure darkness, so thick it seemed to swallow up what little daylight filtered through the tree. I forced myself to sketch it anyway. I noted where the shoring beams had splintered, the way the tunnel floor sloped deeper under the rubble. The whole time the envelope pressed against my ribs, and I swear it felt heavier than it had when I picked it up, almost like something inside was shifting its weight whenever I turned away. After 20 minutes of pretending to care about my notes, I gave up. I unzipped the pack and took the envelope out with both hands. It felt warm, as if it had been sitting in the sun even though the air was cold. Inside was just a single Polaroid photograph. It showed the gully below the switchback, the same knot of laurel and mossy stones I'd crossed earlier, but the angle wasn't right. The picture had been taken from up in the trees, From a vantage point, I couldn't imagine anyone reaching without climbing gear. Front and center was a figure in a red windbreaker. My windbreaker. The head was tipped back, staring straight into the camera. My face looked pale and slack, like I'd been frozen mid-breath or drained of something important. I don't know how long I stood there. My hand was shaking so badly the edges of the photo blurred in my vision. It felt like the ground was quietly tilting under me, waiting for me to lose my balance. I slid the Polaroid back into the envelope and sealed it shut. For a second, I thought about wedging it under a rock and walking away. But there was this certainty I couldn't shake, that it would just find me again. I left the tunnel behind. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I stepped straight off the path and started down the slope. My boots slid through layers of damp leaves. Every branch I brushed against left a wet stripe across my sleeve. There weren't any footprints ahead of me. No voices. Just the rasp of my own breathing, rough and too fast. About halfway down, I came across what was left of an old foundation, a rectangle of mortared stones barely as high as my knees. For some reason, climbing over that low wall felt like the only safe thing to do, like maybe the boundary would make me harder to see. So I stepped inside and crouched, pressing my hand to my chest to feel my heartbeat, hoping it would slow down. That's when I heard the voice. It came from somewhere beneath my feet, muffled like someone speaking through a plank floor. The syllables were soft, too clear, and they fell into the cold air without an echo. Didn't move. My legs locked so completely, my knees nearly buckled. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second, I wasn't sure I'd be able to start it again. Nothing moved inside the foundation. No hands reached up. No shadow shifted across the stones. Just the memory of that voice hanging in the air. I finally managed to step backward over the wall, keeping my eyes fixed on that empty space. The slope behind me was steep, and I nearly lost my footing when I turned to scramble away. Rhododendron branches slapped against my face, tangled in my hair. Every time the wind shifted, I thought I heard someone walking behind me, matching my pace in the leaves. I can't tell you how long it took to reach the gravel access road that curved around the base of the ridge. When I finally stumbled out onto it, I was too winded to call for help, even if there'd been anyone there. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually headlights curved around the bend. A silver sedan slowed as it approached, and the woman driving cracked her window, just a few inches watching me with cautious eyes. "You okay?" she asked. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I swallowed, tried again. "I just need a ride back into town." She studied me a moment longer before she unlocked the door. "Get in. I can take you as far as my brother's station." I climbed into the passenger seat. The heat from the vents blasted across my face, making my skin prickle. I set my pack on my lap and pressed my hand against the bulge of the envelope. It still felt warm. We didn't speak for a while. The tires hummed against the road, and I watched the trees slip by out the window, each one looking the same as the last. After a few miles, she cleared her throat. "You been up seed or run?" I nodded. My jaw ached from clenching it so hard. Folks say the old miners, when they knew they weren't coming back, they'd leave letters, sometimes with a name on them. I didn't answer. They say if you pick up a letter with your name, you're already on borrowed time. We didn't talk again after that. I kept my gaze fixed on the dash, counting the seconds between mile markers. When she pulled into the gas station, I climbed out and set my pack down on the pavement. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. I unzipped it, thinking maybe the envelope would still be there. All of this could be pinned down to some prank or misunderstanding. But it was gone. That was it. I never went looking for C to run note 3 again. I'd planned the trip because I couldn't keep pretending I was fine. I'd quit my job 2 weeks earlier after months of telling myself the headaches and that dull ache in my chest were just what happened when you grew up and tried to do everything right. It sounds dramatic now, but at the time I honestly thought if I didn't get away something was going to break in me for good. So I found this listing online for a forestry cabin. The photos made it look plain but safe, like the kind of place where you could lie low and remember how to breathe. I packed everything I thought I'd need, threw it in the back of my car, and drove all night. Somewhere around midnight, I started feeling like I might have made a huge mistake. But by then, I was too tired to care. My pack weighed more than I'd expected. Maybe I overpacked, or maybe my body was just done with me. The straps dug into my shoulders hard enough. I kept shifting them around, trying to find a spot that didn't feel like they were cutting bone. The first hour of the climb stretched out like it would never end. The gravel road wound between these steep ridges so tight I couldn't see much beyond the next bend, and the trees leaned in so close that even in daylight everything felt dim and washed out, like I was looking at the world through an old sheet. I kept telling myself that if I made it to the cabin by dusk, everything would feel manageable. Just a long walk, a place to sleep, and maybe some quiet. I repeated it like a mantra every time the road curved again and the climb got steeper. About a mile from where the little blue dot on my map said the cabin should be, I ran into this rusted metal gate, barely hanging onto its hinges. A busted chain dangled from the latch, and a wooden sign lay face down in the weeds. I nudged it with my boot, and the board caved in like wet cardboard. Part of me wanted to take it as a warning, but I'd come too far to turn around over some old piece of junk, so I stepped over it and kept going. When the clearing finally opened up, the sky had shifted to this washed-out blue that made everything look a little unreal. The cabin was smaller than I'd pictured, just a squat rectangle of gray siding with one window set crooked in the front wall and a roof that sloped lower on one side. There were no tire tracks, no footprints in the patchy gravel, no sign anyone had been there in months. I remember thinking that was probably a good thing. I wanted to be alone after all. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and breathed in air so stale it felt like it sucked the moisture right off my tongue. But I was too tired to care. I dropped my pack in the middle of the floor, kicked off one boot, then gave up on the other, and lay down right next to my gear with my arm draped over my face. I don't think I'd even closed my eyes when I heard footsteps crunching across the gravel outside. At first I didn't react. I told myself it had to be a raccoon, or maybe one of the stray dogs people said still wandered up here. But the steps were too heavy, too deliberate. They started along the left side of the cabin, paused under the window, then circled slowly around the back. Then they stopped right outside the door. I sat up, not breathing, and listened. My pulse was thudding in my ears, so loud it felt like it was drowning everything else out. I stood up as quietly as I could and edged over to the window. I pulled the curtain back an inch, just enough to peek out. Nothing moved in the clearing, no shadows shifting between the trees. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I was so wound up, I was hearing my own heartbeat in the gravel. I had the door open an inch. The steps stopped so abruptly it made the tiny hairs on my neck stand on end. I waited. Nothing. No sound at all. I closed the door again, slid the bolt across, and tried to steady my breathing. But the silence felt thick and watchful, like it was pressing in from every side. I set up the folding chair in the middle of the room. Sitting there with my hands clenched between my knees, I kept telling myself I was exhausted, maybe even a little delirious. A normal person would have laughed it off, I thought. I wished I could laugh, but when dusk slipped into darkness, the footsteps came back. They moved in a slow, steady circuit around the cabin. Once, twice, 3 times. Every time they passed the door, they stopped for a beat too long, like whoever it was listening. My palms were slick, and I was gripping the chair so tight. I thought the thin metal legs might buckle. On the 4th loop, they stopped right behind the wall where I was sitting. I heard breathing, low and measured, like someone trying not to let on they were there. Then it said my name, Elowen. It sounded so much like my voice that my whole body locked up. For a second, I thought maybe I'd said it without realizing. Then it spoke again, Elowen. It whispered just a fraction too slow, too drawn out. Let me in. My scalp prickled cold. I didn't move. I didn't blink. My throat felt too tight to swallow. Elowen, it called again. I'm tired. Let me in. My knuckles had gone white on the chair arms. My vision was starting to blur around the edges. Then there was nothing. That perfect humming silence that made my ears feel full. A scraping sound started up along the bottom edge of the door. It was soft but deliberate. Something dragging back and forth, back and forth. A stick? Fingernails? I couldn't tell. The voice picked up again, each word flattening into something mechanical. Let me in. Let me in. Let me in. I stared at the door until the silence came back all at once. So loud it felt like a roar in my head. I forced myself to stand. My knees felt loose, like they might not hold me. I took 2 shaky steps to the window. My fingers were numb. When I pulled the curtain aside, nothing. The clearing looked exactly the same. No footprints, no shape moving between the trees. I stayed up all night. I didn't sit again, just stood with my back to the far wall, trying to watch the door and the window at the same time. Every time I blinked, I half expected to open my eyes and see someone staring back. When dawn finally came, I unbolted the door and stepped outside. The air felt thin and metallic. The clearing was still and empty, like none of it had ever happened. I told myself it had to be exhaustion, a stress response, my brain replaying my own voice back at me. But as I started down the service road, I kept glancing behind me, half sure I'd see something walking in my footsteps. A quarter mile from the cabin, I stopped. There was a second gate blocking the path. This one was intact. The chain was looped tight, and the sign nailed to the crossbeam was clean, fresh painted. Public property, no retrace. I turned to look behind me. For a second, I couldn't tell which way I'd come from. The road looked the same in both directions. Same gray gravel, same trees leaning in a little too close, as if they were eavesdropping. I picked a direction and started walking. My breath sounded too loud, and every time my heart beat, it felt like it was pushing the world out of focus. When I finally reached my car, I fumbled the keys so many times they slipped right out of my hands onto the gravel. My fingers were trembling so bad I had to brace them against the door just to unlock it. I climbed into the driver's seat and pulled the door shut. I started the engine and drove straight out of the mountains without stopping, and haven't been back since. I was 34 when I headed up to this rutted trail in the Blue Ridge foothills to check on the old cabin my uncle left me after he passed. It was perched by itself on a slope full of hickories and scraggly pines, maybe an hour and a half from my place in Hartley. The folks at the county office insisted somebody needed to verify in person that the structure hadn't caved in before they'd processed the deed. They said it was routine procedure, but it felt a lot like they were just hoping I'd do them the favor of not making one of their clerks drive all the way out here. When I pulled up, I had to park along a ditch because the front gate was so rusted, it looked like it would crumble if I leaned against it too hard. I remember just standing there for a second, wondering if the whole place was going to feel this stubborn. Climbing over the gate felt like crossing into some weird pocket of time that hadn't moved forward in decades. Every step up the drive felt like the land was trying to nudge me right back to my car. Weeds were thick as rope in the tire ruts. There were brown glass bottles wedged under the grass and half sunk into the mud. Old enough the labels had peeled off. My uncle used to complain about teenagers sneaking up here to party. He'd grumble about kids leaving trash behind like they owned the place. But judging by the number of bottles, it must have been half the county's youth group up here at one point. When the cabin finally came into view, it looked exactly how I remembered it, and somehow worse at the same time. The roof sagged so low in the middle it looked like it might just fold in on itself if the wind picked up. Most of the windows were cracked in these delicate spider web patterns. The porch leaned a good 6 inches to one side. I set my foot on the boards and gave them a cautious little bounce. They held, though I couldn't help picturing them giving way and swallowing me into the crawl space. Inside it was just one big dim room. I propped the door open to let in as much daylight as possible. The place still smelled like stale paper and old plywood. Most of my uncle's things were where he'd left them. A rocking chair with a split seat rested in the corner, looking like it hadn't moved in 20 years. A chipped enamel basin sat on a wooden crate that was soft with age. I brushed my hand across a stack of newspapers on the floor, and the top one crumbled at the edge. Some of the dates went back before I was even born. I pulled out my phone and switched it to camera mode. I started taking photos of every corner and every stretch of wall, partly to cover my bases with the county office and partly to prove to myself that I was really doing this. I didn't want someone coming back later claiming I hadn't actually gone inside. As I was making my way along the back wall, I noticed a door that didn't look right. It was 2 new fresh, pale boards, bright nails that still had that silvery sheen. A hook latch held it shut. I stood there a minute, with my phone still in my hand, trying to figure out why I couldn't remember ever seeing it. I used to come up here with my dad when I was little. He'd let me run around while he and my uncle fixed the fence or checked the well, and I would swear that door wasn't here. My first thought was to leave it alone. Just finish the pictures, file the paperwork, and never set foot here again. But you know how it goes. Once you notice something that doesn't belong, it scratches at you. Maybe it was just a storage closet my uncle added at some point. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. I told myself I'd just look, then leave, no big deal. I unhooked the latch and pulled the door open. It swung in without the slightest resistance, like it had been oiled just for me. Behind it, a steep stairwell dropped away into the dark. The walls were just packed dirt held back by planks, and the steps looked brand new. Clean cuts, sharp edges. Someone had put this in long after the rest of the cabin started falling apart. I called down, mostly to convince myself I was being thorough. My voice bounced back in this hollow way that made the hair on my arms stand up. No answer. A cold draft rolled up from below, and I could almost feel it crawl across my skin. I didn't have a flashlight. Stupid of me. But there was enough light leaking around me to see it wasn't a deep basement. I started down anyway, one hand pressed flat against the dirt wall. The steps creaked under my weight, and for a second I pictured the boards giving way and dropping me into whatever was underneath. My chest felt tight, like I was making a mistake I couldn't take back. At the bottom, I had to hunch over. The ceiling sloped so low it almost touched my shoulders. A single bulb hung on a wire from a nail, but there wasn't any pull chain I could see. As my eyes adjusted, I realized the far wall had shelves hammered into the studs. They were lined with small figures, all in neat rows. At first glance, I thought they were just old wooden dolls. I stepped closer, and my stomach flipped. Each one was about a foot tall, carved from pale wood. They were wrapped in scraps of fabric, bits of flannel shirts, strips of denim, torn shoelaces, a piece of plaid that looked exactly like my uncle's work shirt. Their heads were smooth ovals with no faces, just blank, featureless wood. I could feel my throat tightening. I counted them before I even realized I was doing it. 12. Each had a little tag tied around its neck with rough string. I reached out and flipped the first tag over. The names didn't mean anything to me. Leah Brennan. Josiah. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I kept going down the line, telling myself it was fine. Just some weird hobby I had known about. Then I found one with my name on it. 8/14. My whole body went cold. I backed away so fast my boots slipped in the dirt, and I smacked my shoulder against the wall. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking my ribs. I didn't even want to look at it again, but my eyes kept drifting back to the date on the tag. I started moving toward the stairs. I didn't care about the rest. I just needed to get out, but then something shifted in the far corner. At first, it sounded like a board creaking, but it kept going this slow drag across the dirt floor, like someone pulling a foot. I turned. The corner was darker than the rest, and I couldn't tell if something was really there, or if my brain was just filling in shadows. My pulse was thumping in my ears. I wasn't about to stand there and find out. I climbed the stairs as fast as I could without falling. My hands slipped on the planks. I was 3 steps from the top when the door slammed shut, so hard I felt the vibration through the boards. The hook latch clicked into place from the other side. Smooth and deliberate, I froze. One hand pressed to the door, my forehead touched the wood, and for a second I couldn't breathe. I knew, if I tried the latch, it wouldn't budge. Behind me, the scraping started again. Closer this time, my back felt like it was about to split open from tension. I swallowed and counted 3 slow breaths. One more scrape, then nothing. I told myself if I just stayed calm, I'd get out. I could see the daylight under the crack of the door. I put my hand on the latch, eased it up as carefully as I could, and felt it lift free. I didn't look behind me as I opened the door. I stepped back into the main room and shut it, resting my palm flat against the panel, like that would keep anything on the other side from following me. My hands were shaking so bad, I nearly dropped my phone. I backed across the room until I hit the door frame. My chest hurt from trying not to hyperventilate. I didn't bother picking up anything. I didn't want a single thing from that cabin. I walked across the clearing without turning around. I climbed into my car, slammed the door, and started the engine. The drive back down the hill felt like it happened in one stretched-out heartbeat. I didn't go home that night. I pulled into a gas station in Crofton, sat there until I stopped shaking, and called my cousin Ella. I asked if I could stay the night. I didn't explain why. The next morning I called the clerk's office and told them the cabin was still standing. That was all they needed. About a week later I gave it in and looked up the names on the tags. Leah Josiah Brennan. None of them were in my family, but when I searched old county records, they showed up in missing persons reports. People last seen in this area over the last 20 years. I didn't tell anyone about that part. I was supposed to check the boundary markers along the old Ridgewalk Trail when all this started. My cousin Owen had called me the night before, sounding more stressed than usual, and asked if I could swing by that strip of land our family's been trying to unload for years. He said the last survey was so old it might as well have been drawn in crayon, and he didn't trust the paperwork anymore. I figured it a decent excuse to get out of the house for a day. I'd spent most of my teenage summers hiking around those ridges, and part of me still thought of them as familiar. Like a place I could always count on to look the same. I got there around noon. The The gate at the trailhead was so rusted, I half expected it to fall over when I leaned on it. I locked the truck out of habit, even though nobody really comes up that road. Slung my pack onto my shoulder. Took a minute to adjust the straps so they wouldn't dig into my collarbone, and started walking. The gravel track was more weeds than gravel. Grass sprouted in thick clumps right up the middle, and every step knocked loose little stones that tumbled away into the brush. I could feel the heat settling around me. Late August, the air thick enough it felt like standing inside a closed car. By the time I hit the first bend, sweat had already soaked through my shirt between my shoulder blades. I tried to pretend it didn't bother me, but I was regretting the choice of a black t-shirt about 5 minutes in. Owen had told me to watch for red paint blazes on the oaks. There were supposed to be a few survey stakes driven into the dirt every 100 yards or so. I'd stuffed the old map in my pack. It was so creased and worn. It looked like something you'd find stuffed in the glove compartment of a junkyard car. But I'd studied it enough to feel pretty sure I'd recognize the landmarks. About 20 minutes up the ridge, I finally spotted the first blaze. The paint had faded to this dull, almost rust-brown color, like it was trying to disappear into the bark. A few trees farther on, I found another mark that looked fresh enough to stain my fingertips if I touched it. I remember pausing there and wiping the sweat off my forehead, thinking Owen probably would have mentioned if someone had come up here to repaint them. He wasn't exactly the type to forget stuff like that. I kept climbing, using the blazes as guideposts. Pretty quickly, they started getting inconsistent. Some were barely there at all, just a faint smear where paint used to be, and others looked brand new. It was like whoever had marked them kept running out of paint and coming back months later to finish the job. After the 6th or 7th tree, I noticed the spacing was all over the place. Sometimes I could spot the next blaze from where I stood. Other times I'd have to walk 50 yards before another one showed up. I stopped to pull out the map. I turned it over in my hands, trying to line up the ridge notches with what I could see ahead. According to the sketch, I was still right on the boundary line, but the distances between blazes just didn't add up. I told myself it was nothing. Paint wears off at different rates. Maybe somebody got lazy or got called away in the middle of repainting. But the longer I walked, the harder it was to convince myself it was that simple. Every time I looked back over my shoulder, the last blaze seemed to vanish behind the trunks, like the trees were swallowing the evidence. I'd stand there for a second, squinting, half expecting it to pop back into view. It never did. I pressed on, mostly because turning around felt like admitting I was spooked. And I didn't want to be the guy who called Owen later to explain that, at 34 years old, I chickened out over some paint. When I reached a shallow saddle in the ridge, I stopped to drink and check my phone. My shirt was plastered to my back, and the straps on my pack were rubbing my shoulders raw. The battery icon was still a reassuring green. The GPS that showed me right between two shallow gullies running toward the old service road. That tiny confirmation that I hadn't somehow teleported off the map made me feel a little steadier. I decided I'd push on at least to the northeast corner before heading back. I didn't want to have to come up here again. The trail was rougher past the saddle. Big branches lay across the path, and the moss patches turned slick under my boots. I had to watch every step, trying not to roll an ankle. The blazes were still there, but more spread out. Sometimes I'd have to scan the trees for old axe cuts instead. When I finally decided I'd gone far enough and turned around, the trail didn't look familiar, not even a little. A stand of white pines pressed in tight on my left. The slope dropped into a hollow thick with laurel. I couldn't remember crossing any of it. My pulse thumped hard in my neck, and my mouth felt dry as sawdust. I picked what I thought was the same way back, forcing myself to walk slow to look for any sign of red paint or a stump I recognized. Nothing. No blazes, no stumps, just more pines and more shadows. I tried my phone again. Still plenty of battery, but when I tapped the GPS icon, the whole screen went blank for a moment before restarting itself. When it came back, the map was gone. I stood there turning in a slow circle, hoping some landmark would jump out at me. Nothing looked familiar. I took a deep breath and picked the most obvious path downhill. My logic was simple. If I kept going down, I'd have to hit the fence line or the road eventually. After a while, the trail narrowed to little more than a game path. The soil felt soft under the leaves, and when I looked down, I saw them. Boot prints? Fresh enough. The edges were still crisp, same tread pattern as mine, but both feet angled out, and the impressions were deeper along the outer edges, like the person was walking with their ankles bent. I crouched over them, studying the prints. They were definitely the same size as my boots, I tried to come up with any explanation that didn't involve me making them. Maybe another hiker had passed through earlier that day. I followed the prints, hoping they'd lead somewhere. They traced along the narrowing trail, then vanished completely in a patch of pine needles that looked too neat, too undisturbed. I stopped moving. My heart was thumping so hard it felt like it was shaking my ribs. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Not fast, not running, just 2 or 3 steady crunches, like someone deliberately putting their weight down. I spun around. My shoulders tensed up to my ears, expecting to see someone step into view. Nothing, just trees. I tried to clear my throat and called out, "Hey, hello? You okay back there?" My voice sounded thin and too high. Silence. I stood there longer than I probably should have, straining to hear anything else. Nothing. I swallowed and forced my legs to keep moving. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't pull in a full breath. Every time I looked back over my shoulder, the trees seemed closer together. Trail just a little steeper than I remembered. When I rounded a big fallen log, I saw something hanging from a sapling. At first I thought it was a strip of survey tape, red and faded, but when I got closer I realized it was cloth. Stained, fraying at the edges, knotted into a crude loop. I didn't touch it. Just the sight of it made my skin crawl. I sidestepped around it and kept moving, faster now, even though my boots slipped on the pine needles. A few minutes later, I stepped into a clearing maybe 20 feet wide. For half a second, I felt relief. Open space. Less chance of someone sneaking up behind me. Then I looked down, boot prints again. Same outward angled tread. Same deep scuff on the right heel. Mine. I crouched and pressed my palm into the nearest print. It matched exactly. I'd walked in a complete circle without ever realizing. My throat closed up. I could hear Owen in my head telling me, "If you get turned around, pick a bearing and commit." I pulled my compass out. The needle drifted a few degrees, then started spinning in lazy circles. I tapped the glass, no change. A branch cracked behind me, heavier this time, deliberate. I straightened, my scalp prickling like someone was threading cold wires into my hair. I picked the far edge of the clearing, fixed my eyes on a black stump, and started walking. The footsteps started again, unhurried, closer. I didn't look back. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clamp them on my pack straps to keep from dropping the compass. When the trees began to thin, I saw fence posts through the brush. Relief hit so hard my knees went weak. I forced my legs to move faster, stumbling twice, clawing at vines to keep from falling. I hit the fence with my shoulder. Rusted wire snagged my forearm and ripped a shallow line of skin, but I barely felt it. I shoved through a gap and turned, panting so hard my chest hurt. The trees were still, nothing moved. I waited, straining to hear anything. No footsteps. I didn't give myself time to second guess. I walked the old service road all the way back to my truck without stopping once. My key slipped out of my sweaty hand the first time I tried to unlock the door. When I finally got in, I locked everything and sat there with my forehead resting on the steering while trying to slow my breathing. When I started the engine, I left without looking back, not even once. At 32, I was working as a field surveyor for a forestry outfit based out of Merritton, West Virginia. Most weeks I spent more time in the woods than I did in my own apartment. I didn't mind. Honestly, I'd liked the routine. Early mornings loading up the truck, long drives out to tracts of land nobody had cared about in decades, the quiet that settled in once I killed the engine. It was the kind of job you either learn to love or quit after the first season. Most of the time my assignments took me so deep into the hills you couldn't hear the highway, couldn't even pick up static on the radio. Those ridges folded over each other, so many times the horizon turned into a layered blue haze. You'd swear you could walk in a straight line and still end up back where you started. It sounds dramatic, but if you've ever spent a day out there alone, you know how easy it is to lose your bearings. That morning in late October, the air had that damp bite that tells you winter's getting close. I turned off the paved road and started up this rutted track that crawled along a ridge like someone had laid it down by accident. The property used to belong to a coal company before some investment group in Illinois bought it at auction. As far as I knew, none of them had ever bothered to see what they'd paid for. My job was simple: confirm the old boundary stakes, take photos, record the GPS points, and get back to town before the light vanished. I eased my truck into this narrow pull-off that looked more like a landslide than a parking area. It was just wide enough to let me open the door without scraping paint. No other vehicles, no sign that anyone else had been around lately. I remember thinking it was almost peaceful, just the hum of the engine winding down and the trees creaking in the wind. I should have enjoyed that moment more. I strapped on my pack and started uphill, following a faint trail where runoff had carved a shallow groove. Every couple of steps, shales skidded out from under my boots. I tried to convince myself it would be worth it once I reached the first stake. It's funny how your brain can latch onto tiny goals when you're out there alone. Just get to that flat spot. Just photograph the stake. Just finish one more section. After 20 minutes of steady climbing, my legs were burning and my breath came in short clouds. Finally, I reached a level bench where the record said the first marker would be. Sure enough, it was there. A rusted iron rod sticking up at an awkward angle, half choked by a mat of tangled roots. It looked like nobody had touched it in decades. I squatted down, took photos from 3 sides, logged the coordinates on my tablet, and flipped through my paperwork. According to the old survey, there were 4 more stakes running north along the ridge. I stood there a minute, catching my breath. The sky was that flat, washed-out gray that never seemed to brighten no matter how late it got. I told myself I'd move fast, get this over with, and maybe even make it back to town before dark. I kept climbing, counting my paces, trying to ignore the way the silence started to feel heavier the farther I went. About 30 yards on, I caught sight of something that made me stop. A line of small stone cairns. They were built from flat creek rocks, each stacked in neat little columns about knee-high. They formed a line so straight it looked measured, stretching away into the trees until the trunks swallowed them. I'd seen rock piles before, old property markers, survey points, the usual stuff. But something about these felt different. I couldn't explain it, even to myself. They looked too clean. No moss clinging to the cracks. No leaves tucked between the stones. Like somebody had built them recently. Maybe that morning, at the 4th cairn, I noticed a strip of white cloth. It was wedged under the top rock, edges frayed, but the fabric itself bright as bleached bone. Clean in a way that didn't make sense. I reached for my phone to snap a photo for my supervisor, hoping he'd have some explanation that didn't involve trespassers or pranksters. But when I checked the screen, my signal bar was gone. No service, not even a flicker. I tried to shrug it off. If you spend enough time in the hills, you learn the cell towers don't care how badly you want to check in. Still, I felt this little knot of unease tightened in my chest. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. I kept going. By mid-afternoon, the sky had turned the color of old dishwater. I checked my compass, thinking I'd better start circling back. The needle twitched once, then started drifting in slow circles. I tapped it against my palm. No change, just lazy spinning like it couldn't make up its mind. I tried not to let the frustration show on my face, though there was nobody to see it. I picked what I guessed was west and started down the slope, counting my steps. 20 at a time, then reset. 20 more. The ground didn't cooperate. 1 minute, it felt like a steady descent. The next, it was rising under my boots, then flattening, then dropping again. It was disorienting in a way I hadn't experienced before, like the ridge itself kept tilting when I wasn't looking. After maybe 15 minutes, I stepped right back into that same line of cairns. My own boot prints were still there, circling back in the damp leaves like I'd never left. My heart started hammering. I swallowed, feeling my mouth go dry. I picked out a landmark, a dead pine with a lightning scar spiraling from the crown to the roots, and decided I'd walk straight toward it. No detours. No checking the compass, just a straight line. When I reached the tree, another strip of white cloth hung from a low branch. It was tied in a tight little knot, edges fluttering in the still air. It looked fresh. Too fresh. I called out before I could stop myself. "Hello? Is somebody here?" My voice sounded too loud, too alone. Nothing answered, no wind, no movement. I turned away, feeling that cold, prickling certainty that I wasn't alone. I tried to focus on my footing, on the practical things, counting steps, keeping an eye on the slope. But soon I started noticing other objects that didn't belong. A shard of pale ceramic, half buried in the dirt. A blue marble wedged into a knot in a tree trunk. A twist of aluminum foil dangling from a branch. They felt like breadcrumbs. Markers, left by someone who knew these hills better than I ever could. Maybe they were meant for me. Maybe not. Then I saw it. A dented tin coffee pot propped against a fallen log. I was sure it hadn't been there minutes before. A square of yellowed paper was tucked under the handle. I crouched, more out of habit than curiosity, and eased it free. "Stay tonight." The words were pressed so hard into the paper, the pencil had torn little valleys into the fibers. My stomach felt like it was filling up with ice water. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. No movement, no voices, nothing. I forced myself to keep going. My boots slipped on loose shale, skidded on wet leaves. Every so often, another strip of white cloth showed up, tied to a sapling or branch. Bright, waiting. When the compass spun a full circle without pausing, I gave up on it. I jammed it in my vest and picked the steepest line I could find, hoping gravity would drag me out of whatever loop I'd wandered into. It felt like I was descending forever. My legs were shaking, my breath coming ragged. Just when I thought I'd have to stop, I stumbled into a clearing. Right in the center stood a shelter. Saplings lashed into a frame, covered by a blue tarp weighted down with rocks. The doorway was nothing but a ragged gash. I should have turned back. I should have run, but some part of me needed to see what was inside. I edged closer and looked in. The dirt floor was swept clean. In the corner, a cardboard box sat open, filled with tiny bones wrapped in cloth. Beside it, a rusted lantern half full of something cloudy. I backed out, my heart battering my ribs so hard it made my vision pulse. Right there in the mud was a single footprint. Bare. Wide. Toes spread unnaturally far apart. I didn't call out again. I didn't even look back. I started moving as fast as I could, half running, half sliding, grabbing saplings for balance. I was so focused on not going head first down the slope that I almost missed the vibration in my vest. My phone. One new video message. I tapped it open with fingers that didn't feel like they belonged to me. The video was under 10 seconds, shot from behind. My blue pack, my hair was sticking out under my cap. You could hear me breathing. I spun, gasping so hard my chest hurt. Nobody there. I didn't wait to see if they'd show themselves. I shoved the phone into my pocket and ran. My legs felt like water. My throat felt raw. Then, finally, I caught the dull gleam of my truck's windshield through the trees. I broke into a sprint, crashed the last few feet, wrenched the door open and threw myself inside, locked all 4 doors before I could catch my breath. I didn't look back, didn't give myself time to wonder who or what might be watching. I started the engine, reversed until the gravel slipped under my tires, and kept driving until the ridge was nothing but a smudge behind me. That night, I filed my report. My supervisor, Darren, said no one else had ever found cairns or shelters or any of it. The property changed hands the next spring. I never went back, prickling certainty that I wasn't alone. I tried to focus on my footing, on the practical things, counting steps, keeping an eye on the slope. But soon I started noticing other objects that didn't belong. A shard of pale ceramic, half buried in the dirt. A blue marble wedged into a knot in a tree trunk. A twist of aluminum foil dangling from a branch. They felt like breadcrumbs. Markers, left by someone who knew these hills better than I ever could. Maybe they were meant for me. Maybe not. Then I saw it. A dented tin coffee pot propped against a fallen log. I was sure it hadn't been there minutes before. A square of yellowed paper was tucked under the handle. I crouched, more out of habit than curiosity, and eased it free. Stay tonight. The words were pressed so hard into the paper, the pencil had torn little valleys into the fibers. My stomach felt like it was filling up with ice water. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. No movement, no voices, nothing. I forced myself to keep going. My boots slipped on loose shale, skidded on wet leaves. Every so often, another strip of white cloth showed up, tied to a sapling or branch. Bright, waiting. When the compass spun a full circle without pausing, I gave up on it. I jammed it in my vest and picked the steepest line I could find, hoping gravity would drag me out of whatever loop I'd wandered into. It felt like I was descending forever. My legs were shaking, my breath coming ragged. Just when I thought I'd have to stop, I stumbled into a clearing. Right in the center stood a shelter. Saplings lashed into a frame, covered by a blue tarp weighted down with rocks. The doorway was nothing but a ragged gash. I should have turned back. I should have run, but some part of me needed to see what was inside. I edged closer and looked in. The dirt floor was swept clean. In the corner, a cardboard box sat open, filled with tiny bones wrapped in cloth. Beside it, a rusted lantern half full of something cloudy. I backed out, my heart battering my ribs so hard it made my vision pulse. Right there in the mud was a single footprint. Bare. Wide. Toes spread unnaturally far apart. I didn't call out again. I didn't even look back. I started moving as fast as I could, half running, half sliding, grabbing saplings for balance. I was so focused on not going head first down the slope that I almost missed the vibration in my vest. My phone. One new video message. I tapped it open with fingers that didn't feel like they belonged to me. The video was under 10 seconds, shot from behind. My blue pack, my hair was sticking out under my cap. You could hear me breathing. I spun, gasping so hard my chest hurt. Nobody there. I didn't wait to see if they'd show themselves. I shoved the phone into my pocket and ran. My legs felt like water. My throat felt raw. Then, finally, I caught the dull gleam of my truck's windshield through the trees. I broke into a sprint, crashed the last few feet, wrenched the door open and threw myself inside, locked all 4 doors before I could catch my breath. I didn't look back, didn't give myself time to wonder who or what might be watching. I started the engine, reversed until the gravel slipped under my tires, and kept driving until the ridge was nothing but a smudge behind me. That night, I filed my report. My supervisor, Darren, said no one else had ever found cairns or shelters or any of it. The property changed hands the next spring. I never went back.